Hello and welcome to the Ocean Impact Podcast. In this episode, we caught up via Skype with David Carter, the CEO of Austral Fisheries. David takes us on an amazing journey through this podcast into what it is that Austral does, how they've become such a leader in sustainable fishing, and what makes this man so special. He is incredibly highly regarded amongst his peers and the business community in Australia, and it was an absolute treat to get to spend over an hour talking with David. During the podcast, David does mention a very exciting accelerator program they are running this year in 2020. Now, if you are listening in and you are someone who thinks you might be able to have an innovative solution to help increase the market of Austral sustainable seafood in Australia, then applications close on the 27th of May. Do a search online for Start Some Good Seafood for Good and you'll find all the information. If you enjoy the podcast, please share and make some commentary, give it a review. We love it when you do so, and feel free to send us any questions. I hope you enjoy this episode of the Ocean Impact Podcast. Can't take the ocean out of me. So very pleased to have on the podcast today David Carter, who is the CEO of Austral Fisheries. Thank you so much for your time, David.
Pleasure, Tim. Good to be with you. I think that's the standard line, isn't it? Good to be with you.
I think that is. Look, I think we're going to just go right down to the juicy stuff from the beginning. Let's just learn a little bit about you, David, and tell us, I guess, how you came to be the Chief Executive of Austral Fisheries. And really where I'd love to get off initially is just the ocean for you. What does the ocean mean? What's your relationship with the ocean? Let's start there, shall we?
Yeah, well, I guess the ocean began for me as sort of a teenager. I think there was sailing was a big part of it, and then we went out of there. Did quite a bit of sailing, so that was a lot of small boat work in Bass Strait, and then that morphed into during the university years time with 2 Melbourne to Hobart yacht races, 1 Sydney Hobart yacht race, like 5,000 ocean racing miles under my belt at the age of 20, and then sort of uni came around, and the choice of courses ended up leading me into sort of a science style course with a marine zoology sort of flavour, and that all seemed to make sense. So that included jumping in Bass Strait with the early incarnation of scuba bottles and marveling at the wonders beneath the sea, and it was just a big part of who I became. Even though I'm the son of a vet, and he was very much a bit terrestrial, but no, he did light the fuse on some of the early sailing activities, and that morphed into other things.
Great. So you're saying there your father was a bit of a landlubber, but gave a bit of an insight into getting out on top of the ocean. What was it that drew you to going under the ocean and doing some of those early days in scuba?
Curiosity, I think. Just having a look at another perspective. So scuba was just that wonderful experience of weightlessness and sort of freedom. It was a bit vigorous in Bass Strait in the middle of winter, so it was a test. But no, it was kind of just to marvel at all that entirely different environment, and I think that wonder remains all those years later.
Tell us about the relationship that you have with the ocean now in 2020.
Well, it's come a long way since then, and it's got a bit more. It's a bit more serious. I don't spend enough time on the water. That's a tragic reality of life for me now. So I don't own a boat anymore. So the ocean for me is now just this focus. Obviously, from a professional point of view, it's the source of our livelihood and business activity. In a personal sense, it's more about what the ocean, the role the ocean plays on the planet, and the important stewardship we all need to apply to keep it in good shape. And it's really, the ocean's now one of those, become a cause, I guess, for me.
That's going to really be the subject of today's conversation. But let's go back again to the transition. So once you graduated university, you found yourself working as a deckhand on a prawn trawler. So how and why did that leap happen from a graduate to then going and working on a prawn trawler?
I think after 3 years at uni, I hadn't any great ambition to become like higher order science, go and get a PhD in marine science, join one of the scientific institutions if you could get a job. But at that time, and we're talking late 70s here, Australia was just declaring a 200-mile exclusive economic zone, and I'd kind of got sick of being a barnacle on the arsehole of society. So I thought I should go and do something useful, and I stepped up. Thought the fishing game would be a good thing. All this new exclusive economic zone, we can see if we can make a difference there. So went to the local post office, rifled through lots of different yellow pages from around the country. Ended up writing about 40 letters to what I thought were the bigger fishing interests around the country. Got 2 only replies, and both were out of Western Australia. And off the back of that, one of those opportunities was with indeed this business, so in its various antecedents. And the guy that interviewed me, it was less an interview, more of a two-hour monologue, which was gorgeous and very generous of him. But at the end of that, he said, "There's a boat leaving Darwin in a week. You can be on it if you want." So scurried home, had a premature 21st birthday, and got on a plane to Darwin. So that was a big change.
Had you pitched yourself for any particular role? It was literally just, I want to work on a vessel, I'll do anything.
Pretty much, yeah. No, I knew I wanted to be something useful. I figured I had to start at the bottom. I had no trouble with that. It fit with all the sailing background, so I knew how to tie a knot and so I tie a boat up and those sorts of basic things, given that experience, and the rest I had to kind of learn on the job. But I was pretty much dispatched, and Murray said at that stage, you can go off to sea and become a trainee millionaire. So still in training, Tim.
So you obviously spent a lot of time out there working in the fisheries that you are now at the head of. So tell us a little bit about the experience out there on the trawlers, what it was like then, what it's like now.
Yeah, it was pretty colourful. At that stage, most of the workforce was either hiding from somewhere or escaping or trying to dodge alimony payments or something. So, really colourful set of wild characters. So it was a bit of an affront for a sweet young thing like myself from comfortable middle-class Melbourne to find himself in the middle of the wilds of the great northern Australia. And within 6 weeks of being on this boat, I was the longest-serving crewman, which tells you something. And it was pretty. It was interesting times. But again, my personality was able to fit in and just roll with the punches, and I ended up working 7 months solid with that skipper, and he was very grateful. Got a nice little cash bonus at the end, and went home and bought my first diesel-powered Golf. So I was hooked.
So you were hooked, and so from there, where did the journey take you next? Was it just a matter of coming back and doing season after season for a while? When did you start to see?
No, there was that gap. So we had this period when I went back to Melbourne. It was the middle of winter. It was a bit, what do I do next? the at sea stuff, the actual fishing stuff, I kind of felt I'd done it, and there wasn't like I didn't want to really hang around and be like an engineer or a skipper too much. But the opportunity came up to move to the west, where the business was building a fleet of 10 boats super quick. So I came across to Perth, and that was a crazy ride. So I became the owner's representative in the shipyard as these boats were rolling off the production line at the pace of about one every 2 weeks. So it was pretty wild, and I had the job of doing sea trials, getting them fitted out, provision, and sending them on the way. So it was quite good fun, and those boats ended up round in Townsville and on the east coast, and they were to go fishing off the east coast at that stage, but that didn't last too long. We ended up struggling to make a living out of that fishery, and finally made a decision to commit to the Gulf of Carpentaria prawn fishery, where things were it was a bit more productive, and things were a bit better managed, and you had a chance of making a dollar. But again, that morphed into other challenges as the fishery got heavily overfished during the mid '80s, and then ensued like about a 25-year battle to reduce the size of the fleet, and finally in 2007, after lots of twists and turns, the fleet went from nearly 300 back to 52.
Wow. Is that sort of indicative of what's happening across the board with fisheries in highly developed nations and regions? Are we seeing this paring back, or what are some of the trends that are happening in Australia or in other developed regions?
There's different ways of doing it. In fisheries, there's different management approaches. So we can have input management systems which determine the number of boats and the amount of gear that are in a fishery, and that works quite well for an annual crop like prawns, where you can't forecast 1 year to the next what you're likely to catch. The species that are longer lived, anything from 3-5 upwards years of life expectancy for a species, you can start to manage through output controls, which are quotas. And so it plays out differently, and there's different economic drivers. But in input control fishery, like the prawn fishery, the effort is the question is all about control of the effort, and that was where all the work had to be. So when you had a fishery which is finite, it can only produce so much in a season, and you're trying to feed 300, then everybody goes hungry. If you've got a fishery, as we finally ended up, which is now 52 boats, then we're able to feed everybody that's there, so everybody's got in with a good chance, and there's a bit left over for the fishery for the following year. And I think that fishery now, that northern prawn fishery, I think is in excellent shape, and we just roll with the seasonal ebb and flow of good years and bad years, really like any other agribusiness.
What was it like, and what did it take to have that intervention with that particular fishery and to get it to this point of sustainability? What are the elements that really needed to come under control, and what were some of the stages that went through in order to make that huge transition in 2007?
Yeah, that was huge, and many steps. So I think one of the things that you got to be careful not to taking too much credit. But I think this business, particularly through my predecessor, my mentor, in fact, was instrumental in keeping that pressure up. So for 25 years, you'd get out of bed and you'd say, we need less boats in this fishery. And then you're dealing with the hard realities of how do you make that happen? Who's going to go and on what terms? And the fishery went through an extraordinary set of birthing pains to get to the point we have now. And in the process, we had little Aussie battlers pitted against corporate operators. We had Senate inquiries, death threats, legal challenge. We had industry-funded buyback. We had government-guaranteed debt to facilitate adjustment. And finally, we had, apart from all of the millions of economic analyses that pointed to the wisdom of the course we were taking, it was tooth and nail. You know, it's like at times hand-to-hand combat almost, because you're dealing with people's livelihoods and you're wanting to make sure that you're recognising that not everybody can be there, and those that those that are leaving need to leave with dignity, and that adjustment is difficult, and those that stay end up having to shoulder some of the burden. We were finally delivered a significant adjustment event with some Commonwealth monies in 2007 that took the fleet, that last yard, from 85 boats to 52. And I think that whole journey really was a powerful learning about the commitment to a longer term outcome. It was the right thing to do. It wasn't the easy thing to do, and to stay focused on the goals. And I'm immensely proud of the fishery that we've got there now.
Yes, and you should be. Just quickly, so how many vessels do you have operating up in that fishery now?
We're operating 11.
11.
Out
Great.
of the 52. Mm.
So that experience and that learning, those 25 years of process to get this great outcome for the fishery, how does that then give us a bit of an insight into the challenges in curtailing overfishing globally and doing similar evolutions to fisheries that clearly need it? What can we learn from that experience, or does that give you, I suppose, hope, or does that give you a sort of indication of just how hard it is to create significant change in other fisheries?
Yeah, a bit of both. The underpinning, I think, in leading fisheries management regimes is the strength of the property right, and Australia's blessed to be in the lead constellation of countries that do recognise the value of access rights in fisheries, and it is that underpinning, that sense of ownership that makes companies like ourselves commit resources to longer term outcomes, and those outcomes and that commitment is aligned with that community expectation. So we have, with that access right, we have a powerful self-interest in seeing that all sorts of stuff gets done right, and that means, and if you like, the fisheries adjustment work, it wasn't so much about a biological outcome or a classic biologically sustainable outcome. It was more about an economic outcome. So we could all go there, 300 boats could pitch up, work for 3 days a year, go home, catch everything that was appropriate. We could have all the other checks and balances in place, but we'd all go broke. And so what we do know is you can't be, if you really want to aspire to the big things, you still got to make a quid. The line I use, which is, you got to be in the black to be green. If you're in the red, then every day is a struggle, and none of this bigger stuff happens. And we do see examples in other fisheries where that's the case. I'm hesitant to point and name fisheries, but where they've been unable to address capacity, then you end up with the worst of everything. You end up with poor environmental outcomes, poor safety outcomes, poor maintenance and new investment outcomes, low investment in new technology, low investment in branding and positioning, and really overall poor social license outcomes. So it's kind of this vicious circle. And I think, again, to your question, the northern prawn fishery has been a good example of what a strong rights base can do but it still needs. This again a bit trite, but it does need that leadership. You need those the right people pushing at the right time.
Mm. So that sounds like a good example, I suppose, where these property rights have been fought for and are well established. Let's go to one of your other fisheries, which is the Patagonian toothfish that happens in the sort of Southern Ocean. Tell us a little bit about how property rights can work in a setting like that, because obviously we know a huge amount about the illegal and renegade operators that go down there. So talk a little bit about that particular fishery and some of the challenges you've had there.
Yeah, a very different experience. We at that stage in our life, we had Spanish investment, and they were very keen that we diversify out of just prawn fishing into some of the deep sea fisheries. They generously had a boat that was surplus to requirements in their South African operation, which was coming to the end of her life, and it was the deal of the century. It nearly did us in, and so we wandered around the high seas, and we saw firsthand how difficult making a living in the commons can be. When you find fish, everybody's able to capitalise on that. So we focused again on some of the Australian subantarctic fisheries. It started with a look-see at the Macquarie fishery, just a pure exploration. We got a quick permit just to go and have a peek. And we found this strange-looking fish. Did quite well out of that, sufficient to make us think that maybe, given that this is sort of the broader circumpolar distribution of toothfish, that there may be something at Heard Island. Again, fortuitous that it is Australian. It is within the Australian 200-mile exclusive economic zone, and so we put a boat down there, or we put this particular boat down there, and a trip like that's worth about $1.5 million with crew and consumables and fuel, and we caught nothing. Went down there, caught nothing. It's like from Albany to Heard Island, depending on the weather, it could be a week or 10 days just to get there. So we went down, wandered around, and thought, that's no good. Came back, and I wasn't driving the bus at that stage, but Murray was sufficiently convinced there was something there. He said, "We're going again. Reload, we're going again." Put another load of fuel in, put a different crew on, another skipper, and down we went. And I don't know whether it's good news or bad news, but we got down there, and we found 6 Argentinian flag vessels, all busily fishing for toothfish in a place we later named Evita's, after that famous Argentinian lady. And then began our complex, contentious relationship with Patagonian toothfish and that part of the world, and it's really been permanently intertwined with illegal fishing and driving the necessary policy settings and building government will and getting the kinds of collaborations that we needed to make that secure our borders, at the same time as developing that fishery, understanding the full extent of it, what would be safe to remove on an annual basis or sustainable, and then building teams and boats and people and brands and all of the other stuff that comes from that. But none of that would have been possible but for, again, this sense of a property right. So the idea that you can be looking after, this is mine, I'm going to look after it.
What's the status of that region now? What do we know of illegal activity down there at this sort of current point in time?
Best guess we have, Tim, is it's non-existent. So that's an extraordinary result. We had up until 2015, there was about 6 boats that were very, very sticky, and if you like, serious serial recalcitrants roaming unregulated through the vast Southern Ocean, and I'm sure helping themselves to some of our fish from time to time. By this stage, we've been able to develop trade certification scheme for fish. That means nobody can buy or sell this fish internationally without a proper, basically a birth certificate and all of the backing that goes with that. But these boats were operating in sort of this grey area, the murky area of illegal operators. And at that stage, Sea Shepherd took an interest in toothfish generally, and they'd suspended whale wars for a tad. And when they first made that announcement, we were somewhat anxious that they may find it difficult to find anybody down there, that they may then sort of redirect some of their interest into looking harder at what we're doing as lawful operators, and that became a bit of a risk. But gradually we got to know those guys. We were able to improve their understanding of the history that we'd had in this fishery, and we now have an exceptionally close relationship. But the outcome of that summer was the successful location of a vessel called the Thunder that was found south of the Australian zone. They pursued that boat for 110 days, wandering around the bottom of the southern Indian Ocean, through under Africa, up the west coast of Africa. And we had a small cameo role in that pursuit, as at that same period we were delivering a boat we just bought and done some refit work in Norway. She was coming into the operation, travelling down the west coast of Africa, and we were able to join in the pursuit, if you like, with that boat. But that was a really interesting, like a powerful collaboration. An NGO with a fishing company, being very public about what illegal fishing represents, and the outcome was, apart from a brilliant documentary that is available, the outcome was the master of the Thunder scuttled his own vessel just a matter of days after we had put our shoulder to the wheel there, and the Sea Shepherd guys, they issued a mayday. They were rescued. They were delivered to an Atlantic jurisdiction, Sao Tome and Principe, and again, Sea Shepherd evidence was able to effect a conviction for the skipper and his officers. And so really that summer saw the end of, in a series of operations, saw the end of those 6 boats that have been a thorn in our side for so long.
Wow, I'd love to come back a little bit more to the toothfish and to the alliance with non-profit organisations, but I just want to say to everyone listening in, go and watch the Chasing the Thunder documentary. I know if you do a search for it in Australia, you'll find you can watch it on 7+, and there's probably other places you can watch it, but it is edge of the seat viewing, and I don't think it really gets any more edge of the seat until those closing moments when the master does decide to scuttle his own ship. But I just want to read out something here, because it was the words of I think, one of the engineers on the Atlas Cove, that new vessel you were talking about, and the way he articulates the sentiment of these legal operators like yourselves to the illegal operators, I just think sums up so much about the project, where he says, if you want to keep fishing in the Southern Ocean, do it through the right channels like everybody else does, and become a responsible person. We have to take care of the little that is left in the seas, because if we don't, there will be nothing left for our children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren over. And when he says those words, it just says these are the people we need to be listening to and supporting in their harvesting of the ocean.
Yeah, and I was super proud because the run up to that, and it was the skipper of the Atlas Cove that wrote the words. It was the chief engineer that conveyed them in Spanish to the master of the Thunder. But my pride came with knowledge that I'd had only 2 conversations with Steve. The first conversation was we were still weeks away from a possible encounter, just saying now, and he wasn't aware of any of the other work that we'd done with Sea Shepherd. He had all of the same negative bias to Sea Shepherd that a big part of the fishing industry would have had. I said to Steve, now, you're going to think I'm crazy, but we're thinking we need to help Sea Shepherd in the pursuit of this boat. Frankly, this is work that we should be doing or government should be doing. We haven't been able to fault their commitment to to this cause and best practice, and watch this space. So we weren't sure whether the logistics would line up. The subsequent, we had to clear a possible engagement with our Japanese partners. So you can imagine some challenges there. And then the logistics was such that yes, this rendezvous or encounter was possible. So it was one more call to Steve saying, "Here's the number for the Bob Barker. Peter Hammerstad's the skipper. I'll leave you guys to organise the timing and the rendezvous. The rest is up to you." And so, a cynic could say, "Well, you wrote those words," but that's not what happened. Steve wrote those words, and they've been reproduced in all sorts of interesting places, including on Paul Watson's Facebook page. So,
well, they came in my part from Outlaw Ocean, which is Ian Abina's great tale of crime and survival in the last untamed frontier. It's a great read.
There you go.
So very different fisheries then, prawns in the north and Patagonian toothfish. How do you approach sustainability for the toothfish? It's a very, very different species. What can you tell us about that particular fish and how you're currently managing that fishery?
Yeah, very different. So where prawns is an annual crop, it's like wheat or cherries or apples. Toothfish is like hardwood timber, long-lived, slow-growing, and as a result, very susceptible to overfishing. So it'd be easy to mine a resource like toothfish if you weren't real careful. So for us, that's meant a really heavy commitment to research and science. Really, ever since we've been operating there, it's been with observers. In fact, 2 observers. We collect an extraordinary amount of biological data on size, gender, aging. We gather otoliths, so we've got very detailed aging knowledge of the stock. We've done archival tags. We've found fish that have swum out of the fishery and then swim back. So we're spending millions annually on fisheries independent surveys, and more recently, as climate becomes an issue that we need to watch for, we've found ourselves looking at the environmental variabilities or climatic change and its impact on productivity for that fishery. So that's a big deal, and we continue to take, I think, a very conservative approach to harvest levels, and all the stock assessment work is done by the Antarctic Division with support by the CSIRO. Those stock assessments are then reviewed by an international panel of scientists who are expert in toothfish through the Commission for the Conservation of Antarctic Living Marine Resources. Anyway, it's very, very comprehensive, Tim, and it's something that we pay a lot of attention to.
So you pay a lot of attention and you pay a lot of money. How does that then translate into the market? And I suppose I might be sort of prying into any of those pain points you have. You can go and do all this incredible work to ensure the viability and sustainability of these fisheries, but does that then translate when it reaches market, and what are you doing to sort of make sure it does?
It's a great fish. This, from a culinary point of view, it's unique. It's a very subtle flavour, exceptionally high oil content at 24% or so. For chefs, it's just hard to bugger up. You can't overcook it like you would a snapper or similar, because it's such a delicate flavour and it's got so much oil. It's just so versatile, whether steamed or grilled or crispy skinned, or it's an amazing fish. So we've got a head start in terms of valuing the product. The extra bits have to then come on top. So I think again, that's been an extraordinary journey. Perhaps a simple example from the early 2000s was, as the illegal fishing started to apply a lot of pressure to the resource, quite rightly, environmental NGOs were looking at the demand side, and there was some pretty significant effort from particularly US-based NGOs to call for a boycott on consumption of the fish. So the simple, risk and reward trade-off. So if we could reduce the reward and increase the risk, then we could do an end to the illegal fishing. The trouble with that was it's a very blunt instrument, and the good guys get wounded. So in our case, here we are with 2 observers on board. We've got all of the compliance costs, all the research costs that go with operating in a lawful fishery. We're having our fish, and in that stage, our fish was being stolen from us. There was fish being removed from the Australian fishery that would impact on our long-term productivity. But insult to injury, we were competing against this fish in those same markets. So you go to the US market, here was a fish that was caught illegally on a much lower cost, without all the fancy bits, and then competing with this unfairly at low prices. So it was a pretty ugly time. We endured. Again, we spent quite a lot of money looking to bring that political pressure to bear that would secure the borders for Australia, and I think we did that pretty well. That was in the early 2000s again. For Australian audiences, it was a Four Corners expose, which I think was the turning point. And then we had some very significant help from the Howard government at that stage, and some increasingly robust on-water compliance actions. So that was all pretty handy. But from a market point of view, we still had this residual, as we started to get the borders under control, we still had this residual kind of boycott cloud hanging over us. And it was socially unacceptable. So particularly if you're a premium brand chef and you're touting the use of in that market, it was a Chilean sea bass. You're selling Chilean sea bass, then you're setting yourself up to be attacked by NGOs who would accuse you of aiding and abetting the willful destruction of this precious remote fish resource. And so you're not going to touch it. And so we saw a whole bunch of high-end users basically abandon the category, even though they loved the fish, they loved working with the fish. It was just too hot to handle. And so we then got a bit systematic about how we could rehabilitate the image of this fish in the marketplace. We began with getting the borders under control, so we could demonstrate that the illegal fishing within the Australian zone was well in hand, or well eliminated. We were successful in that in the early 2000s. We were then in a position where we had enough knowledge of the productivity of the stock, and the impact on ecosystem impacts in sufficient to secure MSC certification. So this is Marine Stewardship Council certification, and that was a big deal. Again, many environmental NGOs viewed that as perhaps not being possible for a species like that, but the bar is very high to meet that requirement, and we jumped over all those hurdles. That still wasn't enough. MSC certification wasn't deemed satisfactory. It was nice insurance. It started to work, but there was still a whole bunch of information on seafood chooser websites and others around the world that said, this is a void. You can't touch this fish. So then we had another process where we went to the next heavyweight in the space, and that's the Monterey Bay Aquarium Seafood Watch Program. And we said to them, you've got an assessment for our fish here, which was perhaps accurate a few years ago, but the world's moved on. We would argue that this is now out of date, and indeed, you are injuring our recovery. You're missing an opportunity to celebrate what is a significant turnaround. They said, well, we've got 2,000 fish in this program. We might get to it in 2 years' time. and we said, well, what else you got? We've got to do better than that. Anyway, we knew we knew Mike Sutton from Monterey Bay, and he said, well, we've experimented with something. So we've got a Swiss consultancy to apply the Monterey Bay Aquarium's, if you like, guidelines for sustainable fisheries and their traffic light system. They've got red, green, and amber, and that was another year's process. We went through an extraordinary amount of sort of hoops to test that. Again, 40 different NGOs involved in one form or another, and at the end of that, we were able to shift their advice on our fish from red or avoid to green or best choice. And so armed with both an MSC certification and a Monterey Bay green rating for the fish, we were able to then systematically work through all of the other seafood chooser websites in a way that we could say, well, listen, you don't have to take our word for it. These independent organisations have assessed this fish to be well managed. You need to revise your advice to your stakeholders. And so bit by bit, we were able to transform a Google search on toothfish from rare and endangered, illegally fished, right through to and boycott, right through to celebrity chef endorsements and recipe suggestions. And that step alone was critical in allowing those big name chefs to put this fish they love back on the menu. And I think more importantly, or equally importantly, the chance to actually celebrate a success where a fishery's gone, or a species has gone from being pretty well brutalised to now under exceptional and well-managed terms. It's a fantastic story. In fact, there's a book being written about it all.
Is this a precursor to you getting this Lifetime Achievement Award for from the MSC? That sounds like a huge amount of your time and energy going into overcoming that massive obstacle.
Oh yeah, just one of the. As I reflect on my short 42-year career, I figure I've been blessed with worthy challenges, Tim. That's just one. It's just another one.
Let's talk about one of the next challenges that you're taking on, which is the Seafood for Good initiative, and this is obviously something that you've been pioneering for a while with Austral, but you're also launching a brand new sort of accelerator and crowdfunding project with Start Some Good. Do you want to tell us a little bit about this initiative?
Yep. Maybe just need to back up a little bit. So one of the things that we did once we were able to demonstrate that we were good guys in terms of getting that, particularly that toothfish sorted out. We were able to get also able to get Marine Stewardship Council certified prawn fishery, so the prawn fishery got sorted out as well. So all of our activities were able to tick the box. And again, that's not trivial for a prawn fishery, given the extent of bycatch and other things there. The next step for us was building brands. So we've got a brand for the toothfish, which is Glacier 51. For our tiger prawns, we've got a Skull Island giant tiger prawn brand, and these are sort of themed on provenance, and each of those names has a place on the chart, so they're actually referred to a place. But in the grand tradition of brands, they have an Instagram presence. There's a bit of razzle dazzle that comes from having the right people handling them and say nice things about them. So that all fits there. But the brands also leave you with this deep sense of awareness around, you're visible. You've got your head up, and so you've got to make sure with brands that again. For our business, it started with commodities, and then it went through all these things that we thought were very natural. And then once we'd caught the fish, we'd just put it on the wharf, find somebody that could pay us for the cargo and turn it into money and not worry about it. We then gradually transferred that into this branded space. We felt there was more value there. And the brands are quite a different way of doing business. So you've got to hold fish for a whole year to make sure people have got product available. You are open into much more scrutiny, and then brands also give you something to lose, and that started to have us refocus on some of the issues around social license and the need for dealing proactively with some of what we sort of otherwise referred to as our dirty little secrets. So social license is just about really being fearlessly frank about the things you're not doing as well as you should, but equally being authentic about committing to improve the way you do things. So I think we've done that pretty well. We're certainly not perfect. It's a journey that never ends. But the brands now embody for us. I don't know if you're going to get to this at some point, but we've also taken on the commitment to have more to say about climate and the need to offset our emissions, which we've now done for over 4 years, and that's all wrapped in the brand proposition that we share with our supply chain partners and ultimately our consumers. And so,
on that point, can I say Australia's first carbon neutral fishery, or was there any sort of global accolades that came along with doing that as well?
As far as I know, we're still globally the only fishing company 4 years on. So it's like within 2 weeks of Paris COP21 in 2015, our board agreed to entertain our folly here. For which I'm humbled. But we're still the only ones, so far as I know. There's others. There's some wholesalers and sort of traders and retailers that play with it, but the big emissions in fish is generated from the diesel we burn to put boats to sea, and our accounting includes offsetting all the CO2 derived right through to putting on the gas stove in New York if it gets to that. So
incredible.
It's still a big deal. But it and maybe we'll get to this again, but it does speak to the need for broader view that we have about the need to be relevant, not just to the bottom line, but to our environment and our communities. And for us, we are seeing firsthand the impact of climate change on fisheries. It just didn't feel right to complain about it and be contributing to it at the same time. And the move has given us access and opportunities that we perhaps wouldn't have had any other way. But the Start Some Good initiative is really a little bit reflects the challenge that we've had in fully unlocking the value of our values. So there's all this effort that goes into putting a piece of fish or a prawn on a plate, and most folks really have no idea of the depth and the complexity and the subtlety and the nuance that makes that possible. And if as I get to the end of my career, if that is to endure, if this program is to truly be part of the Austral offer, then it needs to demonstrably generate a financial return. So, and I think that's possible. So I do believe, and this is kind of, it's almost dogma for me, but I don't think doing the right thing needs to be the zero-sum game. I think I absolutely believe that we can do good for planet and people and shareholders all at once. And so Start Some Good's really that itch that we need to scratch. So it's, given that we've got a global reach, how do we connect our value and values in a way that consumers can see, feel and touch it, and essentially affect a transaction? So it's linking sort of this clunky fishing business with folks that care what we care about and are up for, not to put too fine a point on it, they're paying a premium. No, I think people are happy to pay when good things happen.
Yep, and I'm one of those people, proudly to declare myself a conscious consumer. I don't know quite what that means, but it's putting a lens over the way you look at the world and look at the purchases that you make, and just going through that little line of questioning. So safe to say, if people who are listening in are looking through your products through that lens, they're going to be pretty happy with what they find. So how about we have a bit of a chat then about this, the Seafood for Good project with Start Some Good. Essentially, we're looking for innovators, startups, established businesses, people who've got great ideas in how to increase, I suppose, the market for those three brands that you mentioned, Glacier 51, Skull Island, and the Karumba prawns. And Start Some Good are essentially going to be facilitating a 12-week accelerator to help turn these ideas or startups into something crowdfund ready. And those that make it through, I think you're looking for 2 to go through to the final stages of the crowdfunder, and that will then go out pre-summer 2020, and people will be able to actually fund these great ideas. I think it's brilliant. Tell us a little bit about the process in establishing this relationship with Start Some Good and why this angle.
Interesting. So it still links to the idea of people wanting to connect with those values. I confess, influenced to some extent by the Thank You Water experience, where and we're probably not in the same league, but for those not familiar, Thank You Water was quite clearly a profit for purpose, whatever that is, profit for purpose business, and they've got a lovely linkage between each of the products that are offered and particular projects they support. In this case, for water, it was some African projects, and the consumers could scan a code and get an instant feed on where if you like, the profit or the premium that they were paying for this brand would end up. They started pretty simple. They were able to then get their way into, and I could argue even bully their way into supermarkets like Woolworths, off the sheer weight of numbers of consumers saying, we want this on our supermarket shelves, and now well, you see thank you products everywhere. So there's that sort of thinking certainly was heavily in my mind. The Start Some Good approach is just looking to unlock sort of the, if you like, all those clever people out there who can connect with the rarefied air, which is our premium seafood brands, and the consumers that are up for that particular experience. And yeah, really, and that's the challenge. That's we're just looking to all of the energy and creativity of the wider crowd to make what we do an outrageous success in a way that might inspire others to follow our lead.
Yeah, and obviously full transparency there that Ocean Impact Organisation are a proud partner in helping to amplify this, because it's fair and square in our wheelhouse, and we just really want to see it turn into a great success. So if you're listening in and this sounds like something that might be up your alley, or you know someone, you've got until the 27th of May to get applications in. I just did a search online for Start Some Good Seafood, and you'll find links out there. And yeah, it'll be basically going through some mentoring and coaching to turn your great idea into something viable. And then the crowdfunder will come out later in the year. We'll talk about that, and so people will then be able to buy into these ideas. So it's a really great initiative. Well done on that one. What else should we talk about here? There is so much that we can talk about. Do you want to talk a little bit about, I suppose, the future of business as you sort of see it? Obviously, you've been an incredible leader and a pioneer in transforming the seafood sector around your work with Austral. How can that then be a guide or some lessons to be taught to other industries and sectors? Do you pay a lot of attention and thought to that?
Yeah, the idea of leader and impact and those things don't always sit comfortable. I just figure from a personal point of view, yes, I've been here a long time, and I know that at this part of my career, the chance to make the opportunity that I have to make a difference in this business is a unique privilege, and it's what gets me out of bed after so many years in the game. I think it's also that chance to kind of live some of those bigger beliefs. As I said earlier, the idea that business can be a force for good. Right or wrong, I have the view that business that's singularly focused on the bottom line and chooses to ignore the rest of the world is they have their days are numbered. And yeah, so if by our actions we're able to maybe get other people thinking about things, then well and good. I think the other stuff I've kind of enjoyed more lately has been sharing our journey with some other agribusiness people, curiously. So outside of fish specifically, because the fish world, certainly in Australia, is quite small, and most people know what we're up to. But in ag, it's been quite. I think we've been able to not tell them how to do things, but just through stories, being able to explain what we've been up to and what challenges we've had and how we've dealt with them, basically. So, and you look across, the 30 or 40 years, and you see each of these different challenges and the way we've stepped up. And I think the common theme for me is the tendency to do the right thing, not the easy thing. And because we're not a public company and we don't have quarterly reports to worry about, we can take a really long-term view, and we know that ultimately that represents shareholder value. I was quite chuffed a couple of years ago. 2 years ago, we were struggling to catch all of our toothfish quota, for example, and that's not catching quota. That's the cardinal sin in the fish business. That does not compute. And for whatever reason, this was one of the triggers for the work that we've done on looking at environmental variables in that toothfish stock. But we were all set to go. We had another boat that could come in and help us take that fish before the end of the season. We took about 400 tonnes. There was a serious amount of profit involved, and we're all set to hit the button, all set to go with, yes, we could catch all that fish. And we sat there, looked at ourselves and said, no, this is the wrong thing to do. And I told the board this is where we're at. This is a decision we made, and they were very supportive. So extraordinary, millions of dollars of profit at stake. But that was the long-term decision. That was the right decision. You would question if the business was not in as good a shape, possibly a listed company, shareholder expectations, with a quarterly or annual focus. Making that decision would have been very difficult.
Indeed. Another moment just recently where you had the finger on the button, wondering whether or not to push it, was in the context of COVID-19 and launching the fisheries for the season. Do you want to tell us a little bit about that particular experience and any of the stresses related to it and the final decision?
Still living those stresses. Wow. So clearly the virus pandemic government response to that became all-consuming for the world, more so for us during March, as we were seeing ever tighter travel restrictions, seemingly increasing numbers of confirmed cases and the death toll rising, and then having to really challenge ourselves about, well, is it the right thing to be putting young people who have travelled and mixed and don't really understand social isolation or distancing, all on a boat to go into the remote wilds? There was an interesting set of thought processes. Yes, you could have taken the easy approach, and I think these are a bit more philosophical concepts. But I think we've been fed a kind of a line of late. We've got comfortable, and we've been fed a line to suggest that life's risk-free. That we can do everything risk-free. This really put that back in focus, and for me, you're forced to recalibrate your assessment of risk. And I personally got to the view that it was absolutely the right thing to go fishing for the many people that rely on us for that direct benefit of that fishing operation to feed their families and provide them with valued work opportunities, and then more broadly the supporting industries that maintain our boats and transport our product and distribute and sell our products. It was just like, well, we kind of have an obligation here. I just feel we had an obligation to carry on. Now, a cynic could say, well, of course you're going to say that because it's you're an evil, profit-driven pack of bastards. But and that's true. Evil, profit-driven pack of bastards. But it's kind of accept the risk, review the risks, and manage those risks as best you can. Have plans for the eventuality that a positive slips through, and get on with it. And just super proud of the way the Austral teams pulled together to make that happen in both the Southern Ocean fisheries and the prawn fishery, where today we've got 172 people at sea on 15 boats in 3 different fisheries, and we're out there doing it. What that product going to be worth and how we get it off and what the crew changes look like, well, that's tomorrow's problem.
Very very impressive. I think when we discovered and we were chatting around the time of that, it was, I think we were even feeling some of your stresses, mate. But you seem to take on these challenges with absolute gusto and confidence. Does that come obviously down to the amount of time you've been spending in this role, the support you have around you? I wonder if you just talk quickly about your mentor, Murray France, and what you sort of feel can be learned from the mentor experience, and I guess maybe this could be a nice little linkage to those people who may be thinking about the start some Good Accelerator, and building their own personal skills, developing their ideas. What are your sort of sentiments towards mentoring, in particular, Murray?
Yeah, well, I had a great role model. He became like the dad, my other dad in that sense, the professional dad. Well, I'm very proud of my other dad. But and he's super patient, super bright, and generous. And I think that the measure of a good mentor for me is and this is certainly true of his belief in me, which is he saw in me things I could not see myself. And as he handed me the baton, it was, you'll either do quite well at this job or it'll kill you. So he's probably wrong. He might be right on both counts because dodged heart disease and prostate cancer. So, but I'm still here like the Black Knight, Tim.
Awesome. Hey, look, I think we can safely say this has been a great conversation, and anyone who's still listening would attest to that. I wonder if we could just sort of start to wrap a couple of bows around things. Just, I'd love a bit of a glimpse into your attitudes towards Planet Ocean, as we call it. You've mentioned some examples of where rogue fisheries have been contained, and there's much better management taking place. But how do you feel about the state of the ocean and particularly fisheries at the moment, and where is it heading?
I worry. Ocean and climate. So I figure SDG 13 and 14 are me, and the role climate has on our oceans. We're seeing all of that play out: species shift, acidification, increased storm frequency, marine heat waves impacting on mangroves in the Gulf of Carpentaria. It's kind of everywhere, and I think the bigger one for me is, and the one that helps really focus the mind, is to reflect on what the ocean and the planet might look like in 30 years' time. So 30 years is not that far away. But at that time, forecasts, notwithstanding COVID-19, could see humanity number nearly 10 billion. The pressures on the planet are more extreme than ever. The loss of biodiversity, warming generally, reduced productivity from our land. They all reflect sort of massive challenges for humanity. Depending on who I'm reading on the day, you're either quite depressed, or you just put your head down and keep ticking away as best you can. I'm rambling now, but no, the challenges are really daunting. So for fisheries, no easy answer. If you're an Indonesian fisherman in a village in the archipelago, or you're operating in an inshore fishery off the west coast of Africa, then your life is a combination of how many others are trying to use that resource. What level of governance is there? Is there controls on illegal fishing? How does that work? I think there's some interesting initiatives coming along that can help improve supply chains. There's some great collaborations at the big end of town with a thing called CBOS, which we need another hour to talk about. But those 10 companies can start to bring change to supply chains. It's got to happen quick. But that said, we know if we get that right, nature's incredibly resilient, and the rate at which recovery can take place is quite inspiring. Then I flip back into the dark side, and I think about most projections for coral reefs are particularly dire. 2050 sees 70 to 90% of them gone. So yeah, we've got a lot of work to do.
We do indeed. So we might just wrap things up with a couple of call to actions then. Maybe send out some encouraging words to anyone out there, be they a potential applicant for the 12-week accelerator, or maybe that's just a call out there for consumers to be more mindful of their choices. Let's hear some final words from you, David.
Yeah, dead right. So for those that are up for an amazing journey, I think we've done some incredible work. I am sure there's something clever out there that can really galvanise the offer that we've got with a marketplace that cares, and it does speak to this other notion I have about the future of the planet rests with progressive business linking to well-informed consumers. And we've seen in this age of social media and Instagram, just amazing, crazy things can just light that fire that turn a bottle of water into thank you water, or a field of lavender into a major tourist activity, or a pink lake into the same sort of thing. So, I think we're doing God's work, and it's just finding that magic key. So the opportunity to work with motivated, sharp young minds is, for me personally, pretty exciting. So in the accelerator, we'll have a bit of togetherness, hands-on time. And for consumers, choice is important. We all have an obligation to look at how we consume, and to, if we're in that privileged position, and to make choices that are in the better interest of the people, the planet, and in this case, accept that a premium does make that possible, and it inspires others. So, the market's still not perfect, but it's the best we got.
Well, you certainly inspired myself and the whole team at Ocean Impact Organisation, and your leadership most certainly doesn't go unnoticed, mate. So I just wanted to thank you so much for your time today, and maybe just in closing, any last words and where people can go to find out more information about yourself or about Austral or the brands that you send to market.
Thanks, Tim. Well, it's all sits on www.australfisheries.com.au. If you're into emissions, then there's a public disclosure statement on our Scope 3 emissions, which are comprehensive. There's a couple of nice little videos there, and the brands are all listed. The brands each have an Instagram page that covers their names, so that's always a good feed.
Yeah, I actually must admit they're doing a great job of sharing lots of stories with the fisheries in operation at the moment. You can watch the whole process, and I guess that's part of that whole trawler to table attitude. You can see everything about this product as it comes to your table.
Yeah, and we haven't even talked about blockchain and OpenSC, Tim. So we can hold that one for another time.
We can indeed. Look, thank you so much for your time, and once again for your leadership, and we're just really pleased to be able to help amplify the great work that you do.
Many thanks, Tim. Very kind.
Thanks, mate.